Before my son's body was even buried, my daughter-in-law asked if I still had access to his bank accounts. Those were the first words Vanessa said to me after the police officer handed me his wedding ring in a small plastic envelope. I had turned 71 that morning. There was still an untouched lemon cake sitting on my kitchen counter with 2 candles shaped like the number 7 and one leaning slightly to the left. I remember staring at those candles while the officer spoke, as if my mind had decided that crooked wax numbers were easier to process than the words fatal accident. My son Michael had always called me every year at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning on my birthday. "Happy birthday, Mom," he would say before I even had time to answer properly. "Still richer and prettier than everyone else your age." I waited for that call all morning. By noon, I convinced myself he was busy. By 3, I began checking my phone every few minutes. At 5:17 p.m., a state trooper parked outside my home in Greenwich, Connecticut. The sky had already turned the soft grey color that comes before rain, and I remember thinking how strange it was that someone would visit during dinner hour without calling first. I opened the front door expecting a delivery mistake or maybe one of my neighbors needing help. Instead, I saw 2 officers standing side by side with expressions that instantly hollowed out my chest. "Mrs. Evelyn Carter," the older one asked gently. "People think shock feels dramatic. It doesn't. It feels quiet. It feels like staring at a stranger's lips moving while your brain refuses to let the words inside." I heard phrases like collision, highway, immediate response, and "we're very sorry for your loss." But none of them felt real. Michael was 42 years old. He ran a successful investment firm in Manhattan. He worked 12-hour days, drove German cars that practically drove themselves, and still called me every Sunday morning without fail. Men like Michael did not simply vanish between lunch meetings and dinner reservations. I remember gripping the edge of the doorway because suddenly my own house felt unfamiliar beneath my feet. One of the officers handed me Michael's ring. Gold with a thin scratch near the bottom from the time he dropped it during a fishing trip in Maine years ago. I recognized that scratch instantly. That was the moment my knees weakened. Not when they said he was gone. Not when they apologized. The ring did it. Because scratches are personal. Scratches mean history. Scratches mean someone you love existed in the world long enough to leave marks behind. After the officers left, I sat alone in my dining room for nearly an hour without turning on the lights. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking my backyard. The grandfather clock near the staircase ticked loudly through the silence. Tick, tick, tick. Every sound in the house suddenly seemed cruel. Michael had grown up there. I could still picture him at 12 years old racing through the hallway in wet sneakers after Little League practice while his father yelled about mud on the hardwood floors. My late husband Walter used to say our home carried memories in its walls. That night, the walls felt heavier than concrete. Around 7:30, Vanessa arrived. My daughter-in-law stepped through the front door wearing an ivory trench coat darkened slightly by rainwater. Her blonde hair was perfectly brushed despite the weather. Mascara untouched. Nails immaculate. I noticed those details because grief sharpens strange things. She wrapped her arms around me immediately, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe we were 2 women sharing the same unbearable pain. "I can't believe he's gone," she whispered against my shoulder. Her voice trembled perfectly. Too perfectly. I led her into the kitchen because neither of us seemed capable of sitting still. The birthday cake remained untouched beneath its glass cover. Vanessa glanced at it briefly before looking away. "Michael would have hated this happening on your birthday," she said softly. I nodded without speaking. My throat felt packed with sand. She poured herself a glass of water with hands that barely shook. Then she asked the question. "You still have access to Michael's accounts, right?" Just like that. No pause. No hesitation. Not "tell me about the funeral." Not "I don't know what to do." Not "he loved you so much." Bank accounts. I looked at her carefully then. Really looked at her. Vanessa lowered her eyes quickly and added, "There are probably bills coming out automatically. Mortgage payments. Payroll for the company. I just thought someone should handle it before things become complicated." Complicated. My only child had been dead less than 3 hours. Rainwater slid slowly down the kitchen windows behind her while the candles on my untouched birthday cake leaned farther sideways in the dim light. And for the first time since the police arrived, something colder than grief settled quietly into my chest. The funeral home smelled faintly of lilies, polished wood, and burnt coffee. I arrived 40 minutes early because I could not bear sitting alone inside my house another minute. The silence there had changed overnight. It no longer felt peaceful. It felt watchful. As if every room were waiting for me to understand something terrible that everyone else already knew. The morning air outside carried the sharp bite of late October cold, and I remember tightening my wool coat while staring at the funeral home entrance before finally walking inside. Michael hated cold weather. Even as a grown man, he complained about Connecticut winters like a teenager forced to shovel snow. I kept thinking about that while the funeral director explained flower arrangements and seating charts in a low professional voice. Strange things become unbearable after loss. Not the big moments. The small ones. The realization that nobody will ever complain about the weather in the exact same voice again. Vanessa arrived shortly after 9 with 2 of her friends trailing behind her like assistants. One carried a designer handbag larger than most carry-on luggage. The other held Vanessa's phone and coffee cup while whispering updates about guests arriving downstairs. I stood near the chapel entrance watching quietly as Vanessa adjusted the sleeves of her black dress in a hallway mirror. She looked beautiful in the way expensive department store mannequins look beautiful. Perfect. Cold. Untouched by real life. When she noticed me, her expression shifted instantly into grief. Tears filled her eyes with such precision it almost impressed me. "Evelyn," she whispered, reaching for my hands. I barely slept. I nodded gently. None of us did. Her fingers were warm and dry. Not trembling. Not weak. Strong enough to tighten slightly around mine when a tall man in a navy suit approached from the far hallway. "Mrs. Carter," he said carefully. "I am very sorry," repeated. I crouched slightly to smooth Sophie's hair behind her ear. "That is not something you need to worry about right now, sweetheart." She wandered away seconds later toward the refreshment table, already distracted by cookies and fruit trays. But I remained frozen there beside the chapel doors while conversations hummed softly around me. Vanessa was standing across the room speaking quietly with Daniel Reeves again. This time I noticed something else. Every few minutes, she glanced toward me. Not lovingly. Not emotionally. Calculating. Like someone checking whether a security camera was still recording. After the service ended and most guests had left, I returned briefly to the front pew where Michael's framed photograph still rested beside white roses and candles. It was one of my favorite pictures of him. Slightly crooked smile. Blue tie loosened after work. He had sent that photo to me 2 years earlier with the caption, "Tell me honestly, Mom. Do I look tired or distinguished?" I reached out and lightly touched the edge of the frame. "You looked happy," I whispered quietly. Behind me, footsteps echoed against the chapel floor. "Vanessa. Daniel thinks we should meet with the attorneys this week," she said softly. "Not we should rest. Not we should grieve. Attorneys." I turned slowly toward her. Her mascara remained flawless despite an entire day of public mourning. "This week?" I asked gently. She folded her arms against the cold. "There are important financial matters, Evelyn. Michael handled everything. We need clarity before things become complicated." There was that word again. Complicated. Outside the chapel windows, the sky darkened into deep charcoal gray while wind rattled dry leaves across the parking lot. And for the second time since my son died, I felt something far more dangerous than grief beginning to wake inside me. 3 days after the funeral, Vanessa moved into my house with 4 suitcases, 2 garment bags, and a voice so soft anyone listening would have mistaken her for a devoted widow trying to keep her family together. "It does not make sense for Sophie and me to stay alone right now," she explained while one of the movers carried Louis Vuitton luggage through my front door like he had done it 100 times before. "We should be here for each other." I stood near the staircase with a cup of untouched coffee cooling in my hands and watched strangers walk across floors my husband had spent 30 years restoring plank by plank. The house suddenly felt crowded in all the wrong ways. Vanessa chose the guest suite overlooking the backyard even though there were smaller bedrooms upstairs. By evening, expensive candles burned in the bathroom, unfamiliar skincare products lined the marble counters, and Sophie's toys had spread across the living room like colorful little landmines of innocence inside a house drowning in grief. I told myself families adjusted after tragedy. I told myself maybe I was being unfair. But uneasiness has a rhythm to it. Quiet. Persistent. Like water slowly dripping somewhere inside the walls. The next morning, I woke before sunrise the way I always did. Habit. Age. Grief. Perhaps all three. I wrapped myself in a cream cashmere robe and walked downstairs expecting silence, but voices drifted softly from Michael's old office near the library. The door stood partially open. Vanessa was inside speaking on the phone in a low controlled tone. "No, not yet," she whispered. "She still has signing authority." I stopped walking immediately. The hallway grandfather clock ticked loudly beside me. Tick, tick, tick. Vanessa continued speaking. "I understand that, Daniel, but pushing too hard right now will make her suspicious." Suspicious. My fingers tightened slowly around the coffee mug, warming my hands. For a moment I simply stood there staring at the crack of warm yellow light beneath the office door while something cold and sharp unfolded quietly inside my chest. Then the floorboard beneath my slipper creaked softly. Silence followed instantly. Vanessa opened the door seconds later wearing silk pajamas and a polite smile that arrived too quickly. "Oh," she said lightly, placing one hand against her chest. "You scared me." "Could not sleep," I replied calmly. Her phone screen went dark immediately in her hand. "I was just speaking to Daniel about some temporary account issues," she explained. "There are automatic payments tied to Michael's business accounts." I nodded slowly. "At 6 in the morning?" Her smile flickered for half a second before returning. "None of us are sleeping much these days." She walked past me carrying her coffee upstairs, leaving behind the faint scent of vanilla perfume and something else I could not name yet. Calculation, perhaps. By afternoon, another strange thing happened. I entered the kitchen and found one of the household staff removing framed photographs from the breakfast room walls. "What are you doing?" I asked gently. The young woman looked startled. "Mrs. Vanessa asked me to update the decor." Decor. I stared at the empty spaces where family photographs had hung for years. Michael at age 10 holding a striped bass during our Cape Cod vacation. Michael graduating from Columbia. Michael dancing with me at his wedding while Vanessa smiled for cameras nearby. Gone. Just like that. "Please put them back," I said quietly. The staff member nodded immediately, embarrassed. Later that evening, I noticed Michael's office drawers had been reorganized. His desk looked cleaner than it ever had while he was alive. Too clean. Michael was brilliant but messy in the harmless way busy men often are. Stacks of financial journals. Loose notes. Fountain pens everywhere. Now the surfaces looked sterile. Controlled. I opened one drawer and immediately noticed something missing. His Rolex. Stainless steel with a blue face. He wore it almost every day since his 40th birthday. The police had returned his wallet and wedding ring after the accident. But not the watch. I stood there staring at the empty velvet watch slot longer than I should have. "Looking for something?" Vanessa asked from the doorway. I turned calmly. Michael's watch. Her expression froze almost invisibly before she crossed her arms lightly. Maybe it was damaged in the accident. Maybe. Such a small word. Such a convenient one. "The police returned everything else," I replied softly. Vanessa walked toward the desk and touched a stack of folders with perfectly manicured fingers. "Evelyn," she sighed gently, "you cannot start torturing yourself over objects right now." Objects. I looked at her carefully then. Really carefully. She sounded patient. Concerned. Reasonable. But there was no grief in her eyes anymore. Only management. Like someone trying to keep a complicated business deal from becoming messy. That night, long after everyone went upstairs, I returned quietly to Michael's office alone. Rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking the dark lawn while shadows from the desk lamp stretched across the floor. I opened drawer after drawer slowly until I found an envelope shoved beneath old tax files near the bottom cabinet. My name was written across the front in Michael's handwriting. Just seeing it made my throat tighten painfully. Inside was a single folded page. Short. Rushed. Uneven pen strokes. Mom, if anything ever feels wrong, promise me you will not trust appearances. Especially hers. I read the sentence 3 times while thunder rolled faintly somewhere beyond the trees outside. Then I noticed something else. The page had been torn from a notebook, which meant there were probably missing pages somewhere. Missing words. Missing truths. And suddenly the house no longer felt like the home where I raised my son. It felt like a stage where everyone except me already knew how the story ended. The next morning, I drove into Manhattan for the first time since the funeral. Traffic crawled slowly across the interstate while cold November rain streaked the windshield in thin silver lines. Michael used to tease me for refusing to let anyone else drive my Mercedes. Mom, he would laugh, you have enough money to hire a chauffeur. I always told him the same thing. Independence was the one luxury I trusted more than wealth. That morning, however, my hands felt strangely stiff against the steering wheel as the skyline appeared through the grey fog ahead. I kept hearing his words from the note inside my mind. Do not trust appearances. Especially hers. Michael's office occupied the top 2 floors of a sleek glass building near Bryant Park. Even after everything, the receptionist greeted me with the same warm smile she had worn for years. Mrs. Carter, she said softly, standing immediately. I am so sorry. I thanked her quietly and noticed several employees lower their voices the moment I entered. Grief changes the atmosphere around a person. People speak softer near you. Smile carefully. Move like they are afraid sudden sounds might shatter what remains of you. Michael's executive assistant, Linda Harper, met me near the elevators. She was in her late 50s with silver blonde hair cut neatly at her jawline and eyes that looked exhausted in the way only loyal employees look after losing someone they respected. I did not know if you would come back here so soon, she admitted gently while leading me toward Michael's office. Neither did I replied. The office smelled faintly of leather chairs, coffee, and Michael's cedarwood cologne lingering like a ghost in the air. His navy suit jacket still hung across the back of his chair. One sleeve slightly folded inward because he always rushed when leaving meetings. I stood there staring at that jacket longer than I should have. Linda remained respectfully quiet behind me until I finally sat down. Mrs. Carter, she said carefully, there is something I think you should know. Her voice changed slightly on those words. Lower. More cautious. I looked up immediately. What is it? Linda hesitated before closing the office door fully. The week before Michael died, he seemed very upset about something involving company accounts. I felt my heartbeat slow instead of quicken. Strange how the body reacts when suspicion begins turning into shape. Did he tell you what it was? She shook her head. Not directly. But he asked me to retrieve archived emails from several private investment folders. Why? He said he thought someone had been moving money without authorization. Rain tapped softly against the enormous windows behind us while midtown traffic blurred below like streams of red and white lights. Someone? I repeated quietly. Linda lowered her voice further. I believe he suspected Vanessa. The room became very still after that. Even the air conditioning seemed quieter somehow. I rested my hands carefully on Michael's desk to hide the slight tremor in my fingers. Did he find proof? Linda glanced toward the closed office door before answering. I do not know. But 2 days before the accident, they argued here after hours. I looked at her sharply. You heard them? Not clearly. But I heard Vanessa say, you are overreacting, and Michael responded with something about lies and missing money. Missing money. The phrase settled heavily inside my chest. Linda opened one of the desk drawers and removed a slim black external hard drive. Michael asked me to keep this safe until he decided what to do next, she explained quietly. After he died, I did not know whether to give it to the attorneys. But after seeing Vanessa here yesterday asking about ownership transfers before the memorial flowers were even removed, she stopped speaking. She did not need to finish the sentence. I understood perfectly. I accepted the hard drive slowly. It felt surprisingly heavy in my palm. Thank you, Linda. She nodded once. There is one more thing. My eyes lifted again. The night Michael died, he cancelled an investor dinner 30 minutes before the accident. That was unusual. He never cancelled meetings without explanation. Did he say where he was going? No. But after he left the office, Vanessa arrived here looking for him. A strange chill traveled slowly through me despite the warmth of the room. Looking for him? Linda nodded. She seemed angry. Not worried. Angry. Neither of us spoke for several seconds after that. Outside the windows, rain drifted across Manhattan in soft gray sheets while the city continued moving beneath us, completely unaware that my entire understanding of my son's death was beginning to crack apart piece by piece. Eventually, I stood and walked toward Michael's bookshelf near the corner office windows. Framed photographs lined the shelves between financial awards and leather-bound business journals. Michael holding Sophie at Disney World. Michael shaking hands with governors and CEOs. Michael beside Vanessa during charity galas, smiling the polished smile wealthy couples learn to wear for cameras. I picked up one photo quietly. Vanessa's hand rested lightly against Michael's chest in the picture. Perfect hair. Perfect posture. Perfect marriage. Appearances. My reflection stared back at me faintly through the glass windows behind the photograph. Older now. Tired. But no longer confused. Because grief can blind a woman for a little while. But instinct eventually opens her eyes again. And for the first time since my son died, I stopped asking myself whether something was wrong. I started asking how much. That evening, I sat alone in Michael's office long after the employees had gone home. Manhattan glowed beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows in soft gold and white lights while rain continued sliding slowly down the glass like melting silver. The city looked beautiful from 30 floors above the streets. Distant. Quiet. Almost unreal. I placed the black hard drive Linda had given me beside Michael's laptop and stared at it for several minutes before finally plugging it in. My reflection appeared faintly across the dark computer screen while files loaded one by one. Financial reports. Email archives. Transaction histories. At first, nothing looked unusual. Numbers. Meetings. Investor schedules. Ordinary pieces of a wealthy man's professional life. Then I opened a folder labeled Personal Review. Inside were screenshots of wire transfers highlighted in red. Several payments had been routed through shell companies connected to luxury retail consulting firms in Miami and Los Angeles. The amounts were enormous. $100,000 here. $200,000 there. Quiet withdrawals spread across nearly 14 months. I frowned slightly. Michael monitored his finances obsessively. He once called his accountant at midnight over a $600 discrepancy in a quarterly report. There was no possibility he overlooked millions disappearing slowly from company accounts. I kept scrolling until one particular document made my stomach tighten. Beneficiary update confirmation. $8 million life insurance policy. Date modified, 3 months earlier. Previous beneficiary, Michael Carter Family Trust. New beneficiary, Vanessa Carter. I leaned back slowly in Michael's leather chair while the room seemed to narrow around me. $8 million. Not to Sophie. Not to a trust. Directly to Vanessa. My eyes drifted toward the rain-covered windows again while something inside me turned colder. Then I noticed another folder. Private correspondence. Most emails were routine until one thread near the bottom caught my attention. The sender name made my chest tighten instantly. Daniel Reeves. Subject line, urgent discussion. I opened it carefully. Michael, I strongly advise against making emotional decisions right now. Vanessa insists there is a misunderstanding. Let us discuss privately before involving outside attorneys. My heartbeat slowed. Another message followed hours later from Michael himself. Emotional. Someone has been stealing from my company while lying directly to my face. Do not ask me to stay calm while my own home turns into a performance. Performance. The same feeling I had sensed from Vanessa since the night of his death. Another email arrived 2 days later. Short. Angry. I know about him. I know about the apartment. We are done. I stared at the screen without moving. Him. Apartment. The room suddenly felt smaller despite the enormous windows surrounding it. I opened the attached file beneath the email. A photograph appeared slowly on the screen. Vanessa exiting a luxury condominium building in Tribeca beside Daniel Reeves. Not holding hands. Nothing dramatic. But intimate enough in the quiet way certain relationships become when people believe nobody important is watching. Their heads tilted toward each other. Comfortable. Familiar. My throat tightened painfully. I closed my eyes for several seconds and remembered Michael at 26 years old helping me carry grocery bags into this very house after Walter died unexpectedly from a heart attack. You are not alone anymore, Mom, he told me back then. I will always take care of you. He meant it. Michael loved deeply. That was always his weakness. The city lights blurred slightly as tears finally rose into my eyes for the first time since the funeral. Not loud tears. Not dramatic ones. Just exhaustion leaking quietly through cracks I had tried desperately to seal shut. I wiped my face carefully before opening the final file inside the folder. Security footage request. Attached was a timestamp. From a parking garage near Michael's office on the night he died. The actual video file had been deleted, but Michael had apparently requested a backup retrieval through private investigators less than 24 hours before the accident. Why would he do that unless he believed something important happened there? My hands rested motionless across the keyboard while memories began rearranging themselves inside my mind. Vanessa asking about bank accounts before burial arrangements. Vanessa arriving at the office angry the night Michael died. Missing money. Missing watch. Missing truths. Suddenly none of it felt disconnected anymore. It felt organized. Intentional. A soft vibration interrupted the silence. My phone. Vanessa. I stared at her name glowing across the screen for 3 full rings before answering calmly. Hello. Her voice sounded warm and smooth. Evelyn, where are you? Sophie has been asking for you. I glanced slowly around Michael's dark office. I needed air. You should not drive into the city alone right now, she replied gently. You have been under so much stress. Stress. Another careful word. Another polished concern wrapped around quiet control. I will be home soon, I said softly. Good, she answered after a small pause. Daniel is coming by tomorrow morning to discuss estate matters with us. Estate matters. The phrase landed differently now. Not professional. Predatory. After we ended the call, I remained sitting there in silence while Manhattan shimmered below like a kingdom built entirely on appearances. Then I opened my purse, removed the folded note Michael had left me, and read his handwriting once more beneath the glow of the office lamp. Do not trust appearances. Especially hers. This time, however, I noticed something I had missed before. Tiny numbers written faintly beneath his signature. Apartment 18C. I stared at those numbers while thunder rolled softly beyond the city skyline. Then I reached for my coat very slowly. Because grief had finally stopped blinding me. And the truth was beginning to leave fingerprints everywhere. Apartment 18C sat inside a luxury high-rise overlooking the Hudson River. The building lobby smelled faintly of white orchids and expensive cleaning products, the kind of place where wealthy people paid enormous amounts of money to feel untouched by ordinary life. I arrived just after noon wearing oversized sunglasses and a camel-colored wool coat despite the cloudy weather. Old women become invisible in cities like New York. That is one advantage of age nobody warns you about. People stop noticing you while you quietly notice everything. The concierge barely glanced at me when I entered. I sat near the fireplace in the lobby pretending to read messages on my phone while watching elevators open and close across the marble floor. Apartment 18C. Michael had hidden those numbers for a reason. Not in his office computer. Not in a safe. In a handwritten note meant only for me. Which meant he knew time was running out before something exploded inside his marriage. At 12:43, Daniel Reeves walked through the front entrance wearing a charcoal overcoat and carrying coffee for two. He did not notice me sitting beneath the enormous abstract painting near the lobby windows. Men like Daniel rarely notice older women unless paperwork requires it. He stepped into the elevator without hesitation. 18th floor. My pulse slowed carefully. 10 minutes later, Vanessa appeared. Blonde hair tucked beneath dark sunglasses despite the cloudy afternoon. Long cream coat. Same controlled posture she wore at the funeral. She moved quickly through the lobby and entered the same elevator. No hesitation. No confusion about where she was going. I remained seated for another full minute after the elevator doors closed. Then I stood slowly and crossed the lobby toward the concierge desk. "Excuse me," I said gently. "I believe my son rented an apartment here before he passed away." "Michael Carter." The young concierge typed briefly before nodding politely. "Yes, Apartment 18C. My chest tightened slightly. "I thought so. Would you like me to call upstairs?" "No," I replied immediately. I only needed confirmation. I left the building calmly, but once outside, cold wind struck my face hard enough to make my eyes water. Not from weather. From realization. Michael had not been paranoid. He had been discovering the truth piece by piece while the people closest to him smiled directly into his face. By the time I returned to Connecticut that evening, the sky had already darkened into deep winter blue. The house glowed warmly from inside. Too warmly. Through the front windows I could see Vanessa laughing softly beside Sophie while setting plates across the dining table like a perfect suburban wife in a holiday commercial. For a brief moment, I simply stood outside in the cold staring through the glass. Appearances. That word followed me everywhere now. Vanessa looked up and noticed me entering through the front door. Instantly her smile softened into concern. "Evelyn," she said gently, "you should have called." I was worried. Worried. Such a beautiful word when spoken by the right person. Such a dangerous one when spoken by the wrong one. Traffic was heavy, I answered calmly while removing my gloves. Sophie ran toward me immediately holding a school drawing covered in glitter and crooked stars. "Grandma, look what I made." I smiled softly and kissed the top of her head. None of this was her fault. Children build homes from whatever adults place around them. Vanessa poured wine into crystal glasses while speaking casually about estate meetings scheduled for later that week. Daniel's name floated through conversation repeatedly now, always framed as helpful. Reliable. Necessary. I listened quietly while cutting roasted chicken into careful bites I barely tasted. Then Vanessa set her fork down gently. "Actually," she said with a small sigh, "Daniel mentioned something today that might help everyone." I lifted my eyes slowly. "Oh, you have been under terrible stress lately," she continued softly. "And maintaining this house alone at your age cannot be easy." There it was. The beginning. Not direct. Never direct. Manipulation dressed politely always arrives smiling. "I manage well enough," I replied calmly. Vanessa nodded sympathetically. "Of course. But there are beautiful assisted living communities now. Luxury ones. Wellness staff. Private chefs. Full medical support." Sophie looked confused beside her mashed potatoes. "Grandma is not sick," she said innocently. Vanessa smiled quickly toward her daughter. "Nobody said Grandma is sick, sweetheart." But her eyes briefly flickered back toward me. Measuring. Watching. I folded my napkin carefully beside my plate. "You have given this a great deal of thought." "I just want what is safest for everyone," she replied smoothly. Safest. Another polished word. I looked at her quietly across the candlelit dining room while memories surfaced unexpectedly inside my mind. Michael at 17 teaching Sophie how to ride a bicycle across my driveway. Michael sitting beside me after Walter's funeral promising this house would always belong to family. Michael laughing during Christmas mornings beneath the chandelier hanging above us right now. And suddenly I understood something with absolute clarity. Vanessa did not see this home as history. She saw square footage, equity, assets, opportunity. After dinner, she disappeared upstairs for a phone call while Sophie watched cartoons in the den. I moved silently through the hallway toward the staircase and paused when I heard Vanessa's voice drifting faintly from the guest suite. "She is becoming suspicious," she whispered sharply. A pause followed. Then quieter words. "No, not yet." I said not yet. My heartbeat slowed again. Calm. Cold. Focused. Because fear disappears the moment certainty arrives. I stepped away from the staircase before she emerged and returned quietly to the library where family photographs lined the shelves beneath warm amber lighting. My eyes settled on one picture of Michael around age 8 standing beside me during a snowstorm with missing front teeth and red mittens too large for his hands. He looked so happy. So safe. I touched the edge of the frame gently. "I see it now," I whispered softly into the empty room. Upstairs, footsteps moved across the guest suite floor while wind rattled tree branches against the dark windows outside. And for the first time since my son died, I stopped feeling like prey. The following week, I began pretending to forget things. Small things at first. I left my reading glasses in the refrigerator one morning and allowed Vanessa to discover them with polite concern. I asked the same question twice during breakfast. I pretended not to remember the name of one of Michael's former business partners when he called the house. None of it was dramatic. That was important. Real manipulation grows best around believable weakness. And Vanessa responded exactly the way I expected. Gentler voice. Longer sighs. More careful smiles exchanged with Daniel Reeves whenever they thought I was not paying attention. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen while Vanessa and Daniel sat together reviewing paperwork across the marble island. They stopped speaking immediately the moment I entered. Daniel closed the folder too quickly. Vanessa smiled too warmly. Tiny mistakes. Tiny tells. "Evelyn," Daniel said smoothly while standing, "we were just discussing long-term asset management." "How responsible of you both," I replied softly. I noticed a faint lipstick mark near the rim of Daniel's coffee cup. Vanessa's shade. Pale rose pink. The kind of detail younger women assume older women no longer notice. I moved slowly around the kitchen preparing tea while they exchanged quick glances behind me. "There are a few signatures we may eventually need from you," Daniel explained carefully. "Nothing urgent." I nodded absent-mindedly while stirring honey into my cup. "You will have to remind me. My memory has not been the same lately." Vanessa's eyes flickered instantly toward Daniel. There it was. Hope. Quiet and hungry. That evening, I overheard them again. The house carried sound strangely after midnight. Voices traveled softly through heating vents and staircases like whispers moving underwater. I had gone downstairs for chamomile tea when I noticed light glowing beneath the library door. Vanessa sat curled against one end of the sofa wearing silk pajamas while Daniel stood beside the fireplace holding a whiskey glass. Too comfortable. Too intimate. "She is declining faster than I expected," Vanessa murmured quietly. Declining. I stood motionless in the dark hallway outside the library while my fingers tightened slowly around the banister rail. Daniel lowered his voice. "Then we need to move carefully. If she changes the trust. Before we secure everything, this becomes complicated." That word again. Complicated. Vanessa sighed softly. "I cannot stay in this house forever pretending to mourn." Daniel crossed the room and sat beside her. Close enough for their knees to touch. "Just a little longer," he said quietly. "Once the assisted living paperwork is finalized, everything becomes easier." Assisted living paperwork. I closed my eyes briefly. Not from pain anymore. From clarity. When people believe they are winning, they stop hiding their arrogance. I stepped backward silently before either of them noticed me and returned upstairs without making a sound. Later that night, I sat awake in bed staring at snow beginning to fall beyond my bedroom windows. The first snowfall of the season. Michael used to love the first snow even as an adult. He always claimed fresh snow made wealthy neighborhoods look honest for a few hours because it covered everything equally. Mansions. Sidewalk cracks. Dead grass. Secrets. My chest tightened at the memory. Then another thought surfaced quietly beside it. If Vanessa and Daniel believed I was weakening mentally, they would become careless faster. The next morning, I began pushing further. During breakfast, I accidentally spilled orange juice across estate documents Daniel had left on the dining table. Vanessa rushed forward immediately. "Oh, Evelyn," she said gently while dabbing papers with napkins. "Maybe you should rest today." "Perhaps," I answered softly. "I keep getting confused lately." Daniel watched me carefully over the rim of his coffee cup. Measuring. Evaluating. Like a man appraising property value. Sophie sat nearby coloring Christmas ornaments on construction paper, completely unaware of the wolves circling quietly around her future. "Grandma forgets things now?" she asked innocently. Vanessa touched her daughter's shoulder quickly. "Everyone gets forgetful sometimes, sweetheart." But her smile betrayed satisfaction she could not fully hide. Later that afternoon, I visited my attorney, Richard Halpern, without telling anyone. Richard had handled the Carter family legal affairs for nearly 30 years. He wore silver-framed glasses and carried the exhausted patience of a man who had spent decades protecting wealthy families from destroying themselves. When I explained everything calmly across his office desk, he listened without interrupting once. No dramatic reactions. No disbelief. Only silence. Finally, he removed his glasses slowly. "Evelyn," he said carefully, "are you asking me to investigate potential financial fraud? I am asking you to protect my grandson's inheritance before predators consume it." Richard studied me quietly for several seconds. "And Vanessa?" I looked toward the snow falling softly outside his office windows. "Vanessa stopped being family the moment my son became more valuable dead than alive." The room remained silent after that. Richard eventually nodded once and opened a legal pad. "Then we move quietly." Quietly. Yes. That was the only way now. Because loud people reveal emotion. Quiet people reveal strategy. When I returned home that evening, Christmas music drifted softly through the house while Vanessa decorated the staircase with pine garland and white ribbon. She looked up smiling warmly as if she belonged there. As if she had not spent the previous night discussing how to remove me from my own life. "You seem tired," she said gently. "Long day?" I removed my gloves slowly and smiled back just enough. "I suppose age catches everyone eventually." Her expression softened with visible relief. And in that exact moment, I realized something dangerous. Vanessa no longer saw me as an obstacle. She saw me as a countdown. 2 weeks before Christmas, I invited everyone to dinner. Not just Vanessa and Sophie. Everyone. Michael's former business partners. A few extended relatives. Daniel Reeves. Even Linda Harper from the office. Vanessa seemed delighted by the idea when I mentioned it over breakfast. "That sounds wonderful," she said warmly while arranging blueberries across Sophie's pancakes. "It might finally help everyone feel normal again." Normal. Such a fragile little fantasy. I smiled softly into my coffee cup and told her I wanted the evening to celebrate family, legacy, and Michael's memory before the holidays arrived. She touched my hand gently after that. He would have wanted that. No. Michael would have wanted honesty. But dishonest people always speak confidently about the wishes of the dead because the dead cannot interrupt them. The week leading up to the dinner, I watched Vanessa carefully. She moved through the house lighter now. More relaxed. She hummed quietly while decorating the Christmas tree in the foyer. She ordered catered food without asking about cost. She spent nearly an hour on the phone discussing renovation possibilities for the upstairs guest wing while assuming I could not hear her from the library. The countdown had made her careless. Daniel visited almost daily now. Sometimes for paperwork. Sometimes supposedly to help Sophie with math homework. One afternoon, I passed the sunroom and noticed Vanessa resting her hand briefly against his wrist while laughing softly at something he whispered. Intimacy always reveals itself through comfort, not passion. People trying to hide relationships remember not to kiss. They forget how naturally they lean toward each other. Richard Halpern handled the rest quietly. Bank records. insurance modifications, unauthorized transfers, the apartment lease under Daniel's secondary holding company. Everything documented carefully, professionally, patiently. My private investigator also recovered something else Michael never had the chance to obtain before he died. Parking garage footage from the night of the argument. No violence. No dramatic confrontation. Just truth. Vanessa and Michael standing near his car speaking intensely while Daniel waited several yards away pretending to check his phone. Michael looked exhausted. Vanessa looked angry. At one point, Michael stepped backward and removed his wedding ring briefly before shoving it back into his pocket. The timestamp showed the confrontation ended only 37 minutes before the accident. When Richard first showed me the footage inside his office, I did not cry. I only stared quietly at my son's face frozen on the screen. Tired. Betrayed. Alone. He knew, I whispered softly. Richard nodded once. I believe he was preparing for divorce proceedings. Divorce. The word echoed strangely inside my chest. Michael had been trying to escape while still believing he had enough time left to do it properly. That realization hurt more than anything else. The dinner arrived on a snowy Friday evening. The house glowed with soft golden lights and fresh pine garlands wrapped around the staircase banisters. Outside, snow drifted steadily across the dark lawn while expensive cars filled the circular driveway one by one. Vanessa wore a deep emerald dress that matched the Christmas decorations perfectly. Elegant. Tasteful. Calculated. She greeted guests beside the front entrance with polished grace while classical piano music played quietly through hidden speakers overhead. Watching her move through my home felt almost surreal now. Like watching an actress who still believed the audience had not noticed the cracks in her performance. Daniel arrived carrying a bottle of wine and kissed Vanessa lightly on the cheek when he thought nobody important was looking. Unfortunately for him, older women become experts at noticing what people try hardest to hide. Dinner itself unfolded beautifully. Candlelight flickered across crystal glasses and polished silverware while conversation drifted between investment markets, holiday travel plans, and memories of Michael. Vanessa played her role perfectly, occasionally lowering her eyes, occasionally touching Sophie's shoulder gently, occasionally speaking about grief with rehearsed softness. But underneath her composure, I sensed anticipation building. She believed the evening marked a transition. The final stage before control became permanent. Halfway through dessert, I placed my fork down carefully against the china plate. The sound rang softly through the dining room. Conversations slowed. Before everyone leaves tonight, I said calmly, there is something important I would like to discuss regarding Michael's estate. Vanessa straightened almost invisibly beside Daniel. There it was again. Hope. Richard Halpern entered the dining room at that exact moment carrying a slim leather portfolio beneath one arm. Behind him walked a grey-haired investigator holding several folders. Silence settled immediately across the table. Vanessa's smile flickered. Once. Evelyn, she asked carefully. I folded my napkin neatly onto the tablecloth before speaking again. Over the past several weeks, I have learned painful truths about the people surrounding my son before his death. Daniel's face lost color first. Vanessa recovered faster. I do not understand, she said softly. No, I replied calmly while meeting her eyes across the candlelight. You understand perfectly. Richard placed copies of bank transfers, apartment records, insurance modifications, and email correspondence carefully across the dining table. Nobody spoke while papers slid quietly over white linen. Sophie looked confused beside her untouched pie. Vanessa's breathing changed slightly. Faster now. Sharper. This is absurd, Daniel said suddenly while pushing back his chair. Richard remained perfectly calm. Sit down, Mr. Reeves. Federal investigators dislike chasing people through snow. The room became still enough to hear logs shifting softly inside the fireplace. Vanessa turned toward me slowly. You investigated me? Her voice finally cracked for the first time since Michael died. Not grief. Fear. I looked at her quietly across the table where my family once celebrated birthdays, Christmas mornings, and ordinary Sundays before greed entered disguised as love. No, I answered softly. My son did. For several seconds after my words settled across the dining room, nobody moved. Snow continued falling softly beyond the tall windows while candlelight flickered against crystal glasses and polished silverware. The Christmas tree near the staircase glowed quietly in the corner like something from another life entirely. Vanessa stared at me as if she had never truly seen me before. Perhaps she had not. Predatory people often mistake kindness for weakness because they cannot imagine restraint existing without fear behind it. Daniel recovered first. Men like him usually do. This proves nothing, he said sharply while standing from his chair. Circumstantial financial documents are not evidence of misconduct. Richard Halpern remained seated calmly at the end of the table. Actually, he replied evenly, the Securities and Exchange Commission disagrees. The investigator beside him opened another folder quietly. Inside were printed statements, photographs, timestamps, and transaction histories arranged with devastating precision. Vanessa's breathing had become shallow now. I noticed because I was no longer watching her emotionally. I was watching her truth. There is a difference. Sophie looked between us in frightened confusion. Mom, she whispered softly. Vanessa immediately turned toward her daughter with practiced warmth. Everything is fine, sweetheart. No. It was not. Nothing had been fine for a very long time. Daniel reached for his coat. I think this conversation is over. Sit down, I said quietly. My voice was not loud. It did not need to be. He froze anyway. I looked directly at him across the table. You spent months helping my daughter-in-law steal from my son while pretending to advise him financially. The least you can do now is remain seated long enough to hear the consequences. Silence followed again. Deep. Heavy. Vanessa's eyes filled suddenly with tears, but this time they were not controlled enough to look beautiful. Fear had finally ruined the performance. Evelyn, she whispered shakily, you do not understand what Michael was becoming. I tilted my head slightly. Then explain it to me. Her lips parted before closing again. Because lies require preparation, and truth had entered the room too quickly for her to rearrange it. Daniel spoke instead. Michael was unstable near the end, he said carefully. Paranoid. Obsessed with control. I almost smiled at that. Wealthy men are always called unstable the moment they begin noticing betrayal. Interesting, I replied softly. Because the only people Michael became suspicious of were the two people secretly sharing an apartment in Manhattan. Vanessa flinched visibly. Around the table, relatives shifted uncomfortably while avoiding eye contact. Nobody enjoys witnessing the collapse of beautiful appearances. Especially during Christmas. Sophie's small voice broke through the silence again. Mommy. Vanessa reached for her daughter's hand immediately, but Sophie pulled back slightly. Children understand tension long before adults realize it. I stood slowly from my chair and walked toward the fireplace where Michael's photograph rested among white holiday candles and pine garland. His smile looked younger in that picture. Freer. Before marriage complicated his life. Before greed entered his home disguised as love. My son spent the final weeks of his life investigating the people he trusted most, I said quietly while looking at the photograph instead of Vanessa. Not because he was paranoid. Because he finally saw the truth. The room remained completely silent except for logs shifting softly inside the fire. Then Vanessa said something that told me everything I needed to know. I never wanted things to happen this way. Not I loved him. Not I miss him. Things. Assets. Circumstances. Outcomes. Even now, she spoke about my son's death like a failed business arrangement. I turned toward her slowly. The moment you saw my grief as opportunity, I said calmly, you stopped being family. Tears slid silently down Vanessa's face now, but I felt nothing watching them. No anger. No satisfaction. Only exhaustion. Grief eventually burns emotion down into something quieter. Something colder. Richard stood and handed several documents across the table. Effective immediately, all estate transfers connected to Mrs. Carter's assets have been frozen pending federal review. Additionally, The revised Carter Family Trust removes all discretionary control previously expected to transfer through marriage. Daniel sank slowly back into his chair. Vanessa stared blankly at the papers in front of her as understanding settled across her face piece by piece. The house. The accounts. The investments. Gone. Not because I screamed. Not because I fought loudly. Because I paid attention. Sophie began crying softly then, frightened more by adult silence than by words she could not fully understand. My chest tightened painfully at the sound. None of this belonged to her. I crossed the room quietly and knelt beside her chair. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "none of this changes how much Grandma loves you." She threw her arms around my neck immediately. Small. Warm. Innocent. I closed my eyes briefly while holding her. Michael's daughter. The only honest piece left from all this damage. Later that night, after attorneys left and guests disappeared one by one into the snowy darkness outside, the house finally became quiet again. Vanessa locked herself inside the guest suite. Daniel had been escorted out before midnight by investigators waiting discreetly outside the property. I stood alone in the kitchen sometime after 1 a.m, staring at the same birthday cake still resting untouched beneath its glass cover weeks later. The candles had long since bent sideways completely. 71. Such a strange age to begin understanding people clearly. Snow covered the backyard now in soft white silence while moonlight reflected faintly across the frozen pool outside. I carried Michael's photograph into the library and sat beside the fireplace alone. "I could not save you," I whispered quietly into the empty room. The fire crackled softly in response. Somewhere upstairs, old floorboards settled beneath the weight of a house finally exhaling its secrets. I looked down at my son's smiling face one last time before setting the frame carefully beside me. Grief had changed me, but betrayal had finished the job.